And those of you who just joined, we're just gonna wait a minute or two here before we kick it off to let everyone be admitted into the call. We've currently got over 10 that are in. So off to a good start here, and we should be kicking it off here in about a minute. And for those of you who are currently in the meeting too, I want to make it clear that if there's any point during the presentation where something piques your interest, feel free to use the message function, and you can ask a question and we'll get updated as the administrators of the meeting, and we can respond to those either when you ask it or at the end of the meeting. All right, so it looks like we have a critical mass in here now, so I will kick it off. My name is Chris Nemus, and additionally on this call, we're going to have two other presenters. So we'll get into the format of the meeting in just a second, but for today, we've got 1 hour, and our focus is really keeping this presentation to what's very actionable and relevant to everyone that's going to be on this meeting today, meaning that for the coronavirus that has recently hit both our country and the economy, what does that mean in terms of available options that you have, strategies, benefits through the university physician group, et cetera. So I'm going to be kicking it off here. This is what we're calling the Summit Series. So we call it the Summit Series because we have 3 subject matter experts from different areas. So I myself formerly practiced as a CPA. I'm currently a financial advisor. We're going to have an attorney speaking and also a certified public accountant. So 3 relevant focus areas. Really today, if you can take away 3 things at the end of the meeting, whether it's something financial related, estate planning related, or tax planning related, that's really what's going to make the difference. So again, this is meant to be 1 hour, very actionable steps that you can take to make sure you're taking advantage of any of the available benefits that are available to you, and also what the government is giving us as these different, whether it's the executive order for the student loans that just came out on August 8th, or it's the stimulus and different ways that you can take advantage of that. We want to make sure it's very relevant to what's happening today. So traditionally, when these type of events would be put on, you'd have the university physician group and its team members, and you'd have a financial professional giving you one message, a tax professional giving you a second message, and then maybe a legal professional talking about estate planning. And by doing that, you get 3 different messages from 3 different people. So in the Summit Series, what we decided to do, and this is in part with Kelly Beck from the University Physician Group, we decided to say, education is more of a team sport. So let's get the 3 professionals going on one team on the same meeting with 3 different focus areas. And then we'll have one message, whether it is financial, tax planning, or estate planning, that we can give to the team. So what it does is it really kind of makes it a more consistent and a more vetted process, so that all of the advice that you're getting and all the different things that we're discussing are going to be consistent and relevant to you. So I'm going to kick it off here. A little bit more about my background, though. As a CPA, I worked with private equity firms and hedge funds for 4 years downtown. So I love the Detroit area. I've been to your new office down there. I've seen, what you guys are doing, and it's really incredible. So I want to say, first of all, I'm glad to be helping everyone that's in the city of Detroit here. And the first little piece that we're going to run through is utilizing your retirement plan. So I've seen all of the different items that are passed along to the team members at the University Physician Group, and one of the best areas that you can take advantage of, and one of the best benefits that they have, is the 403b. And with the 403b, you can save in one of 2 ways. You can save pre-tax, what's called a traditional contribution, when you're investing the money into the 403b. And the second way is called a Roth contribution. So this is something that employers don't actually have to offer, but it's something that you can add on. So it's great that the group took that step of saying, I want to offer the Roth contributions to all the participants. And I'm going to go through mechanically what that means and why it's important, and ultimately why it's the best time to take advantage of those Roth contributions. So just mechanically speaking, in the retirement plan, for a Roth contribution, all that means is that you pay income tax right when you contribute the money. So historically, when you've thought of retirement plans, you've said, okay, well, I can save on taxes because my contribution comes right out of my paycheck. The federal government doesn't touch it. The state government doesn't touch it, and it goes right into the plan. And that is a very strong way of saving. And it's good that for anyone that's done that historically, that you should continue to do it and take advantage of it. But in addition to that, there's a powerful contribution type that's a little bit different. It's called a Roth contribution. So you're paying the income tax, and then the money is being contributed into the account. And so we'll get to the strategy behind that, why it's important to take advantage of it in just a moment. But to get into more of the mechanics too, it's the same contribution amount, whether it's pre-tax or Roth contribution, which is $19,500 per individual. So if you are married, it's more of a 39,000 number for the couple as a whole, but you as an individual, it's 19,500. And so one of the greatest benefits is that when you get taxed on the money right now before you contribute it, what you're doing is saying, I'll take the tax hit now, but in the future, I will not be paying taxes at all on the principal or the earnings that are coming out of those contributions. So with the traditional, where it comes in pre-tax, where the federal government and the state doesn't touch it, when it's distributed to you when you're 59 and a half, and then ultimately you have to take it out on a required minimum distribution standpoint at the age of 72, then the government's going to tax it. And ultimately, no one has a crystal ball and can tell you where tax rates are going to be. But right now, they are very, very low from a historical standpoint. So again, with the Roth contribution, instead of paying tax in the future, you're just paying it now, and you're allowing that money to grow tax-free. And when you have it distributed in the future, there's going to be no tax on it at all. So again, that's what makes it so powerful and such a great tool. So again, 59 and a half or older, you can begin to take that money out of the Roth. These are things, again, great benefits that you can take advantage of. And so the question that we ask ourselves as advisors, financially, tax, and estate planning, we say, will tax rates be higher or lower when you retire? And this is a good way to say, should I do the Roth contribution or should I do the pre-tax contribution? If rates are going to be higher in the future, why don't I just get taxed today? If rates are going to be lower in the future, I'll get taxed then. I'll get taxed tomorrow. So I put a little chart here on this next slide just to kind of help you visualize what tax rates have been historically from the highest marginal rate standpoint. So you can see this from 1913 all the way until 2020. And the one point that's important is that since 1932, roughly the last 90 years, 83% of tax years had higher marginal rates than we have today. So again, the takeaway there is that tax rates right now, from a historical standpoint, are very low, which is why it's beneficial to have the Roth contributions when you're going into your 403B to decide if you're going to do traditional or Roth contributions. I can't sit here and tell you, because I don't have a crystal ball, what the tax rates are going to be in the future, but what I can tell you is right now, historically, they are very low. And the second chart that I'm going to show you about why Roth contributions are so valuable, this has been the market from 1996 to 2020. And this is the S&P 500, so a combination of the 500 largest companies in the United States. And so everyone's familiar with the financial crisis that occurred here in 2008. And most recently, what happened here, which was in 2020, this whole drop here was caused by the coronavirus. And so when you look at how the government responded to the situation at hand, there was a huge stimulus that they injected into the economy, right? Trillions and trillions of dollars. And so a lot of people that are on this call, you may have seen personally or heard relatives getting the check from the government, how they were, putting money into the small businesses so that they could stay open and still employ people, et cetera. And so why might tax rates increase? Well, because there's a bill that comes with the government putting all that money in, right? At the end of the day, the money that they put into the economy today will be collected later through taxes. So again, in addition to tax rates being historically low, there's also a huge stimulus which puts more pressure on people in Congress and the president to say, well, we need to get that money back. How are we going to do it? Through that tax rate hike. So I'm going to move on to the next slide here. From a high level, when you look at other benefits of it, including getting taxed when rates are lower, it's a highly effective estate and retirement planning tool. So when you look at the fact that you don't have to take required minimum distributions at age 72, this means that if you've saved through different types of vehicles, if you've used after-tax saving in a Fidelity investment account, if you've used the traditional IRAs or the traditional 403Bs where it's pre-tax contributions, and also a Roth contribution, you don't have to take any required minimum distributions at age 72 when it's a Roth account versus a traditional where you do. So it's a great tool where you can grab this lifetime growth that's going to be coming out of it. So the money can continue to compound. And what that does is it leaves more for your heirs and the people that are going to be inheriting your money. So whether that's going to be family members like your sons and daughters, whether that's going to be cousins or just anyone down the line, very effective estate and retirement planning tool. And again, one thing that's important to remember is that the account has to be held for 5 years or more from the first contribution to make sure that those that inherit the Roth are going to have no taxes to pay on it. So again, for my son, if I had a Roth IRA, something were to happen to me and it was passed down to him, as long as I had made that first Roth contribution at least 5 years before I passed away, all of the money that my son or the inheritor is going to be taking out of the account will be tax-free as well. So it's beneficial for me, and it's also beneficial for anyone that inherits it. So that's why I say effective estate planning tool as well. So the next piece that I'm going to talk about is what's called a Roth conversion. And so this is for anyone that may have worked at a different company or a different organization and has an outstanding 401k or a 403b or a traditional IRA that holds your funds for your retirement in. And mechanically speaking, what you do through a Roth conversion is you just take a traditional IRA or the pre-tax and you turn it into a Roth account. So essentially it's just a quick taking it from traditional to the Roth. And this is a tax planning strategy that will accelerate your income taxes. So like I just talked about with the traditional contribution versus the Roth, where you pay tax on it today, if you have an account that you're going to be doing a Roth conversion on, whatever amount is converted, let's say, for example, the account is worth $50,000 and you're going to convert half of it, $25,000 of that will become taxable income to you, but forever, for the rest of time, that $25,000, whatever it grows to be, will never be taxed. So again, it's looking at the arbitrage of where are income tax rates today and where are they going to be in the future, what's most likely. And to kind of move on, just to let you know what the benefits are to you, right? Again, it's an estate planning tool because your inheritor with that 5-year rule is not going to have to pay taxes on it either. And you can get the lifetime growth. So again, very, very beneficial to you. The last portion of this would be a backdoor Roth IRA. So if you're in a position where your income phases you out of being able to participate in a Roth IRA separate from your 403B, that's at roughly $196,000 to $206,000, you can do what's called a backdoor Roth IRA. So don't want to get too technical into the details, but essentially all you do is you make a non-deductible contribution to a traditional IRA, which is up around the $6,000 range this year, and immediately convert that to a Roth IRA. So again, the whole strategy that we've just been talking about, whether that's within the 403b or these different accounts that you have outside, is accelerating the income tax because historically the rates are very low right now. So again, beneficial to you, beneficial to your family, and the kids will help protect them in the future. And the last slide that I'm going to be running through here is just a reminder, utilize the benefits that are available to you. If you look at the life insurance that's offered through the University Physician Group, it's a group policy, meaning that they use the law of large numbers to make sure that everyone's going to be covered for life insurance. And it's not as stringent in terms of the medical exams that are normally required as if you were to go buy an individual policy on your own. So significant discount to you in terms of being able to protect your family as kind of a supplement to any policies you might have already. You have the opportunity to purchase optional term insurance from $10,000 up to $500,000, so very beneficial again. That's in increments of $10,000, not to exceed 5 times your salary. Disability is actually really nice because as long as you're a qualified employee, the physician group already handles it for you. And the retirement plan, like I just mentioned before, highly beneficial to you to take advantage of the 403B and specifically consider those Roth options and those contributions because they're very, very beneficial in terms of the tax rates today. I can't really stress that enough. And so with that, I'm actually going to be turning it over to Matthew Kidd, and he's going to be talking through the tax planning perspective. So this is what's going to be impacted as a result of the CARES Act and the executive order, et cetera. So I will pass it to Matt now.
Thanks, Chris. I'm Matthew Kidd. I'm a partner at Blunden & Kidd Accounting and Consulting. I actually primarily work with physicians, which makes up about 70% of our practice. I actually come from a family of CPAs. I've got 2 brothers and a father who are all CPAs that primarily work with physicians, and we always give my mother a hard time and tell her that if she watched us a little bit closer when we were younger, we'd be the doctors instead of the ones working with them. But here we are. So the things that I'm going to cover today, we'll touch on a couple of pieces of the CARES Act, executive order that was just signed last week, and then we'll briefly touch on 1099 strategies for anybody that works as a contractor outside of their normal employment. So one of the major pieces of the CARES Act was they created penalty-free retirement plan distributions for coronavirus-related reasons. The coronavirus-related reasons were pretty much everything under the sun, so it's not a big hurdle to overcome. The nice thing about it is that if you take the distribution, the tax actually gets spread over a 3-year period. So if you took out $90,000 in 2020, you would only pay tax on $30,000 this year, $30,000 following, $30,000 in the last year. And then the other piece of that puzzle is that if you return the money after 3 years, all of the tax gets refunded. So that's something to consider if you need the money out of the retirement plan. But as part of that, also, if you need money, interest rates are incredibly low right now. So you'd have to weigh whether you're better off with money coming out of the retirement plan or borrowing. I'll just briefly touch on the Paycheck Protection Program in case any of you are 1099 workers. In addition, the applications have closed. We're seeing a lot of questions on people that are calling us wanting to apply immediately. I would strongly recommend you wait, actually apply for the forgiveness. There's rumors floating through Congress, if they ever pass the second round of stimulus, that there's going to be a forgiveness safe harbor. So if your loan is under $150,000, which if you're working as a 1099 side gig, it's going to be under 150 grand. It'll basically be a good faith forgiveness. So you'll sign a statement saying that you used the funds as you were supposed to, and it'll be forgiven. That is not out right now. So if your bank accepted applications, you would need to fill out the full application. So just be patient on that if you do have the PPP money. And then the other piece with the retirement plan distributions is they haven't They haven't totally explained the mechanisms of how you're supposed to return the money in 3 years. So again, that's kind of a wait and see to see what that actually looks like. Then most of you probably saw the news over the weekend on the president's executive order. There were a few key pieces in it. A big one that they have made a big deal about is they refer to it as the payroll tax holiday. It's important to note that it is a deferral. It is not a forgiveness or a waiver of the payroll taxes. So if you were to opt into this, it's really only a 6-month deferral because you're going to have to pay those taxes back when you file your tax return in April. And really, it's only Social Security and Medicare tax, which is only 7.5%. So you're not looking at a real big increase in your net paycheck by utilizing this program. And if you do utilize it, you need to be sure that you're setting aside the money because Pied Piper comes in April and you're going to have to pay it back. So I would utilize that program with caution because it's really just a 6-month short-term loan. The other big piece for you is the student loan deferrals. This waives interest on all federal-backed loans until December 31st of 2020, and it delays principal payments till December 31st as well. For this, absolutely worth utilizing. From everything that I've seen, the Department of Education has the authority to do it, so it is likely to stand. And there's no downside to it, really. You save the interest for an extra 6 months. You can defer those payments. All right, so the next piece of it is the unemployment aid. In the executive order, it provided an additional $400 supplement to replace the $600 supplement that originally went through. There are some issues with this. The states are required to pay 25% of the benefit, which is a huge hurdle for the states to begin with. Most of the states' unemployment funds are mostly or fully depleted already. So we're not really sure how they would come up with $100 out of the $400 benefit to pay to the recipients in their states. The second hurdle for it is they're required to set up a separate system from what they used before. The way that the executive order was written versus the original law, they're required to set up a whole separate system from what they originally used. So I'm not overly confident on the unemployment piece actually making it into anyone's pockets. And then the last point on it is there's court challenges on all of it. As I mentioned, the student loan piece, that is likely to be upheld because the Department of Education has done it in the past, and it's pretty clear that they have the authority to do that. The rest of it, it's a toss-up. The courts are going to decide whether President Trump actually had constitutional authority to issue the additional unemployment aid and do the payroll tax holiday. The hope is, and a week ago I was saying the expectation, but now I'm switching it to hope, is that Congress passes a second round of stimulus. There are pieces to the first round that still need to be fixed surrounding several programs. And really the executive order is a attempted stopgap that may not actually be effective. So we still need Congress to do something, and we hope they will. So next, I'm going to touch a little bit on 1099 self-employed income strategies. A lot of the physicians we work with are full-time employees, but maybe you get 1099 income from reading x-rays or scans for a hospital. Sometimes we'll see if you sub for private practice physician groups, you might get a 1099 from them. And a lot of physicians just don't do anything with it. They get the $20,000 1099 and they just call it a day. But there are some important things that we can do with that 1099 in addition to what you're doing through UPG. So the first one is retirement plan contributions. I always recommend maxing out your employer retirement plan options first. They're generally a better option, lower administrative costs. So put in your max 19,500 into the UPG plan. If you're over 50, you get the extra $6,000 catch up. But then if you want to contribute money beyond that, there's a lot of great options if you receive a 1099. So to kind of run through the solo 401k, SEP IRA, and then a defined benefit plan are the three most popular options. The solo 401k is great. You can very easily get $19,000, $20,000 in there as long as you have the 1099 to support it, because it is similar to your 403b in that the employee can contribute up to the 19,500, which, since it's just you, you're contributing the 19,500, and then any income that you have in excess of that, you can do an employer match of up to 20%. And it's referred to as an employer match, but since you are the employer and the only employee, it's really just you putting in an additional 20% on top of the 19,000. So if you're maxing out your retirement and you receive a 1099, this is a great route to go. The SEP IRA is similar, except that you can only do the 20% contribution of the net income. So realistically today, I don't see a huge reason to opt into a SEP over the solo 401k, because the solo 401k administrative costs have gone down significantly in the past 5-10 years since it's been around. And that used to be the draw to the SEP. But now you can contribute an additional 19,500 using the 401k over what you can do with the SEP. And the last piece is the defined benefit plan. This is really an option if you're receiving significant income outside of your employment, and you want to pack in as much money as possible into retirement. This is something to consider. Most of you who are full-time employees, this doesn't make sense. You can put in many cases, over $100,000 a year into these plans if you have the income to support it, but that would mean you'd need over $100,000 of 1099 income. And the administrative costs are also significantly higher. So if you do have that 1099 income, strongly consider the solo 401k. And then we're just going to touch on a couple of common missed tax deductions that we see with the physicians who receive the $10,000, $20,000 1099 and don't bother writing off expenses. Let's say you sub at a few different clinics. You can track all that mileage. So your time driving to the clinic as a 1099, you can deduct that. Assuming that you're using your cell phone, internet for this 1099 work on the side. If you're reading scans at home, you're using the internet for the scans. And then another big piece is sometimes you're paying liability insurance outside of, well, you should be paying liability insurance if you're working as a 1099. You're going to want to make sure to deduct that. And then any continuing education expenses that occur that's not covered by UPG, those are also deductible, including travel to and from any conferences that's not reimbursed. and really, you should be tracking it. If it's a relatively low amount, popping it into Excel works. If you're driving a lot for something, there are several mileage tracking apps out there that may be a good option. So then just a couple other things to consider in the current environment. One, the Roth conversions, which Chris did a good job of covering already. So I'll just kind of gloss over that. The other big thing that you want to keep an eye on right now is the low interest rates. If you have a mortgage or other loans that you haven't refinanced recently, you should absolutely look into refinancing. I think mortgage rates are sitting around 3% right now, which is incredibly low. I mean, despite the fact that my brother recently bought a house and he was bemoaning the fact that his interest rate had bumped up to 3% when they actually closed on the mortgage. And our dad was quick to point out that his first house had a 16% interest rate. So it is historically low. And if we kick over to the next slide, I mean, this is just showing the U.S. Treasury yield. The line on the top is from December 31st of 13. And then the line on the bottom is from July 31st of this year. So you can see just the difference in the last 7 years of where we're at today versus where we were in 2013 and how advantageous it can be to refinance at this point. All right. So with that, if you have any questions, feel free to pop them into the chat window and I can answer them. If not, thank you, and I will kick it back over to Chris. Oh, sorry, Kevin.
So we're going to be, Kevin's going to be the speaker now. He's going to run through the estate planning perspectives here.
Yeah, thanks, Chris, and thanks, Matt. Good information from both of you. And just briefly to follow up with what Matt was saying about low interest rates, if you bought a house, 5 years ago, it's highly likely that it has appreciated in value significantly, which also provides you an opportunity to either open up a line of credit or take cash out because you have so much built-in equity in the house. So that's a good way to take advantage of low rates and appreciated property values. So that's a little bit besides the point. I just want to touch on that when Matt said it. And I'll just go into what I do briefly, a little bit about me, and then I'll hop right into some estate planning thoughts that you might not be aware of. And so I practice out of Novi, and I handle a lot of estate planning and succession planning for various clients. I also do a fair amount of business transactional work, which essentially involves reviewing contracts or negotiating contracts and helping buy or sell assets or real estate. And then I do have a real estate brokerage where I primarily sell residential real estate for clients. I don't utilize that too much. It's just more of an ancillary thing that I have been helping clients with. And so briefly about me, I'm married with a wife and 2 daughters, one aged 4 and one aged 3 months. And on hot summer days like today, we like to swim or go on bike rides. And so I'll just hop right into it now. And briefly, since I am an attorney, I say stuff like this, but this is not legal advice, what I'm about to tell you. So don't take actions based on what I say. You should definitely consult an attorney or a financial advisor or tax advisor before you take action, because this is general information to make you aware of some estate planning tools. And every person has a unique situation, and so you really need to talk to someone before you take action. So with that, I'm going to talk about changes from COVID in the estate planning arena. I also want to touch on a couple of the major documents in an estate plan, which is a will and a trust, and then asset ownership as well, and how that relates to estate planning. So getting right into it, the major plan or change, I should say, for estate planning is that remote notary and witnessing is now allowed, and that is through August 31st. So you have about 19 more days to utilize that. It's likely the governor will extend that, but as of right now, that will expire. So some of the documents that you sign for an estate plan require either a notary signature or witnesses. And before you had to do that in person, now you can do it remotely. So it makes it a little bit easier if you want to set up your estate plan to get that done. However, I still encourage in-person signings. I have a big conference room, and you can do them in big conference rooms, so you can still socially distance and sign the documents. And I only say that because the remote signing and witnessing requires some hoops, and when there's certain hurdles you have to jump through, it can lead to mistakes. And because it's so new, I still encourage in-person signings. But nevertheless, you can still get it done remotely. So in estate planning, there's generally 4 documents that people will hear about. There's a will, a trust, a power of attorney, and a patient advocate. And the will and the trust are the 2 documents that people are most familiar with, or at least hear about the most. So I want to just briefly go over those so you're familiar with them and what they mean to you. So the will is probably the most important estate planning document you're going to want to sign and put in place. And a lot of people don't realize this, but the state of Michigan, and every state, has a default estate plan, and that's set out. If you Google MCL 700.1101, it'll be there. And that estate plan is in place because if you die with assets, those have to be transferred to someone. And if you don't say who they're going to be transferred to, the state does. And another thing that people don't realize is it doesn't all go to the spouse. And this comes as a surprise to a lot of people. And so if your estate, or the portion that the spouse would get, isn't sufficient to live off of for the rest of his or her life, that your spouse will be dependent on other people. And generally, the other people who are entitled to the estate are family members, whether it be a spouse, parents, or siblings. They have no legal obligation once they get those assets to either transfer them to the spouse or do anything but whatever they want with. So there's no legal obligation to help anyone out. And people think, oh, well, my kid or my siblings or my parents would never, leave my spouse high and dry or not help them out. But once you get that money or the assets, you just don't know. And so the will is intended to very clearly dictate where you want your assets to go on your death. And again, I've never met with a client where I went through, here's what happens if you do nothing, and they were satisfied with that result. So the will, relatively simple document, can really resolve a lot of issues with estate planning. The second important thing a will does is it names a personal representative, and that is the person who's going to find all your assets or get all your assets together and then distribute them however your will says. And if you don't have a will, the court will name the personal representative. And oftentimes, and the other thing is, the statute has a list of people who are the highest priority of who should be the personal representative. But if you don't name one, they have to go to court, tell the court why they should be the personal representative, and the court has to select the person. And if you have an untimely death, this is at a time when they're still, trying to figure out or trying to realize the fact that you're not here anymore, and there's a lot going on. And that's just one more thing on their plate that they're going to have to deal with, which could easily be resolved with a will. And then again, if you have minor children, you'll want to name a guardian and conservator, because if you pass with minor children, or you and your spouse pass with minor children, a family member or a distant relative or a friend is going to have to petition the court and say why they should be the guardian of your children and make very important financial decisions on their behalf. And if you have multiple siblings who think they should be the one, then they're going to have to go to court and essentially argue in front of a judge. And then the judge ultimately decides based on what they hear. And so if you don't want a judge making that decision, it's very simple. You can just lay it out in the will, and that resolves that issue. And you can also name backup people in the event that your first named person isn't around or doesn't want to do it. And then finally, as I touched on, the will distributes assets to certain people. And this is an important document, and so I always say, if you just Google Michigan Peace of Mind, that's Michigan Peace of Mind, the State Bar of Michigan has a great 50-page packet that has some great information. You can do a statutory will yourself. It tells you all the instructions. You can name these people. You can distribute some assets, and it's a very cheap way to at least have something written down that way, and put it in a safe place, and then tell people where it is. And that's a great resource to become more knowledgeable about estate planning and put a will in place. So briefly, I'll talk about the trust. A lot of people think that it's some obscure document, and that's not very true. But ultimately, what you're doing is you're providing more flexibility with how you distribute assets. So the will, you have to essentially distribute the assets immediately after death. With a trust, you can string along asset distributions for a period of time, or you can have certain hurdles that have to be met by people who would be a beneficiary of your assets. So a very common way to do this is to say, after my kids graduate from college, they'll get 25% of the whatever they're entitled to. And then when they hit 30, they get another 50%. And then when they hit 45, they can have the rest. And then finally, the trust is a private administration. When you do a will, you still probate the assets. It's just the assets are already determined where they go, but the court still has to sign off on it. With a trust, the will say everything goes into my trust, and then after that, you're done with the court, and you can distribute the assets however the trust says privately. And the thing is, anyone can go into court, the probate court, and dig up the records there. And so if there's information, a lot of solicitors will look through those documents, and they can just solicit people. And so from a privacy standpoint, the trust is beneficial. And then lastly, I want to touch on asset ownership. This is a major part of estate planning, and people like your financial advisor, like Chris, can help, because not only is it asset ownership, but beneficiary designation as well. So you can essentially transfer all your assets without doing a will or a trust if you title them appropriately. Usually this isn't the best way to do it, but an example is a joint bank account. If you have your child and you on the account, when you pass, your child automatically gets that account. Same with real estate. If your kids or someone else is on title, when you pass, they will get assets. They will get the real estate without as a matter of law. You don't have to do anything. And then same with beneficiary designation. For your retirement accounts, you gotta put someone down. I can't tell you how many times I see situations where there's no beneficiary named. And so you gotta do that. If you don't know how to do it, you gotta talk to your financial advisor. Usually you can go in online now and make those designations. And whether you designate your spouse or your children or the trust, if you set that up, you gotta do that as part of the estate plan. And then there was a question about joint ownership of a mortgage. So if you have a spouse or if you purchased a house and you're the primary earner, it's likely you may have put title to the property only in your name. And if you want to add your spouse in as an estate planning mechanism or as part of your estate plan, you can draft a simple deed and deed the property to you and your spouse. So now she is entitled to the property, and if you pass at a different date than she does, she will have full rights to the property. And then there's also another question about protections for essentially qualified plans or plans like Roth IRA and 401ks. And whether they can, if there's one that's better for protecting you in the event of a lawsuit. And those are protected from creditors. And generally speaking, there's no real distinction. The whole concept behind those types of retirement accounts is that they are protected from creditors. And so your savings, you're not completely wiped out if you have a lawsuit or something like that. So there might be some, if you really want to get technical, there could be some slight differences, but in general, those are protected from lawsuits. So that sums up my presentation, and I think Chris is going to have a few closing remarks, and then we'll open up the presentation to questions.
All right, perfect. Thank you very much, Kevin. And I can't stress how important that last point is that Kevin made too, in terms of the protection of retirement plans. O.J. Simpson was actually able to retain his retirement plan even throughout all the civil cases that he was going through. And no matter what the outcome of those were going to be, he was able to maintain those retirement plans. So they are, very sticky. They're protected. They're meant to be protected from creditors, like Kevin just mentioned. So again, at the beginning of this, I told you if you just take three things away, no matter what focus area is most pertinent to you at this point, try to take a couple of these things away. I'm just going to quickly run through them. I believe this presentation is going to be recorded and you can distribute it, and we'll see about the slides as well in terms of giving this to you. But feel free to screenshot this once I get to the bottom as well. So the first takeaway would be utilize your benefits. We could do an entire presentation for 1 hour talking about just the benefits that are offered to you, why they're so great, and how to use them. I touched on a lot of those things. Specifically with the life insurance, again, you could do a whole presentation about why it's important to have it, but ultimately take advantage of that group policy, take advantage of the benefits that UPG has given you. Second is to consider the Roth contributions and conversions. Again, we don't have a crystal ball here, and we can't tell you what income tax rates are going to be, but we can tell you that historically they are very low right now. Understand the high-level advantages of the CARES Act. So having a strong CPA that you can look to and say, okay, how do I take advantage, whether it is those deductions that Matt was talking about, whether it is the different stimulus or the checks that your kids might be receiving or you might be receiving. Make sure you take advantage of those, because they're in place to make sure that you are doing okay and your family's doing okay. For your paycheck and the student loans, it was great that Matt gave us that little summary saying, take advantage of the student loan portion of it, but be careful with the paycheck part in terms of the Social Security and Medicare that you can opt out of, because again, it's not that you're going to keep that money forever. You're just kicking the bill down the road. The next thing is if you receive a 1099, know it's deductible. Again, having a strong CPA or being able to just research this stuff and know what's deductible, what's ordinary and necessary for you to do your job. You got to drive there, you got to have the necessary materials, the equipment, etc. That's especially relevant as well if any of the residents are going to be doing moonlighting. Perfect spot for you to look and say, okay, I'm getting a 1099 because I'm at this clinic. What can I deduct, etc. The next one is money is cheap right now, meaning that interest rates are very low. You saw the 2013 versus 2020 chart, and just the difference there. All of the mortgages and really everything that you're seeing is being driven off of the federal funds rate, which drives the 10-year federal rate in terms of the bonds the government issues. And right now that's very low. It's historically low, actually. It's the lowest it's ever been. So that means that money is cheap. Refinance, do everything you can to make sure that your monthly expenses aren't higher than they have to be. And that goes for if you bought 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 7 years ago, whatever. Estate planning can be done from the couch throughout August. Kind of tongue in cheek here. And I know Kevin said it is true too, that if you can do it in person, socially distanced, that is a better way to do it. But if you have a medical condition, if a family member has a medical condition, you can't do it, this is available to you. So normally you go into the office, you have a few meetings, the documents are drawn up, you come back in to sign them. Now you can have those meetings digitally. You can do it if you have a medical need or it's just safer for you for whatever reason, you can do it from your couch. So everyone should have an estate plan. That is, bare minimum, specifically if you have kids in a family. Very important to do that. Consider a trust to discreetly distribute those assets. Public records, anyone can go and look at them. So we call them creditors and predators, right? Stay away from them. Make it a trust. Have your will just put everything into the trust so that no one's seeing where your assets are going, how much they are, etc. And then lastly, know your asset and liability ownership. So Kevin made a really, really good point about the beneficiaries on the retirement plans and also for your insurance policies, because a lot of people will make them when they're maybe, if you've been there for 20 years or 25 years, maybe you were unmarried before you started and you had the beneficiary listed as your father, your mother, your brother. Now you're married with 2 kids, you've never updated the beneficiary on it. Of course, you would assume, like he said, that the family members are going to take care of the spouse and kids, but you should make that happen. Don't count on someone else to do it. So know how the beneficiaries are titled, how the assets are titled, and kind of take it from there. So with that, we've got 5 minutes for any questions. We had a couple that came in. And one thing that we were talking to the benefits group about as well is that for any of these questions, you have a team there that's dedicated for the 403B, the insurance, the disability, flexible spending, etc. So again, utilize the benefits and utilize the team. They're there for you. Obviously, if there's anything specifically related to what's going on, Kelly can direct you to us, but always go to the benefits team first because they're there for you. We're here to help them and you as well. So are there any questions specifically that anyone has? Feel free to take yourself off of mute or type it into the chat, whatever you feel most comfortable doing. We covered a lot of stuff, so feel free to let it rip if you got any questions.